Hi, it's Matt Dalby, and I'm back with my reading of Shelley's Queen Mab and Notes. And this week it's Canto V and the notes that follow from that. Queen Mab, Canto V. Thus do the generations of the earth go to the grave and issue from the womb, surviving still the imperishable change that renovates the world. Even as the leaves, which the keen frost wind of the waning year has scattered on the forest soil and heaped for many seasons there, though long they choke, loading with loathsome rottenness the land, all germs of promise. Yet when the tall trees from which they fell, shorn of their lovely shapes, lie level with the earth to moulder there, they fertilise the land they long deformed, till from the breathing lawn a forest springs, of youth, integrity and loveliness, like that which gave it life to spring and die. Thus suicidal selfishness, that blights the fairest feelings of the opening heart, is destined to decay, whilst from the soil shall spring all virtue, all delight, all love, and judgment cease to wage unnatural war with passion's unsubduable array. Twin sister of religion, selfishness, rival in crime and falsehood, aping all the wanton horrors of her bloody play, yet frozen, unimpassioned, spiritless, shunning the light and owning not its name, compelled by its deformity to screen with flimsy veil of justice and of right its unattractive lineaments that scare all, save a brood of ignorance, at once the cause and the effect of tyranny, unblushing, hardened, sensual and vile, dead to all love but of its abjectness, with heart impassive by more noble powers than unshared pleasure, sordid gain or fame, despising its own miserable being, which still it longs yet fears to disenthrall. Hence commerce springs, the venal interchange of all that human art or nature yield, which wealth should purchase not but want demand, and natural kindness hasten to supply from the full fountain of its boundless love, forever stifled, drained and tainted now. Commerce, beneath whose poison-breathing shade no solitary virtue dares to spring, but poverty and wealth, with equal hand, scatter their withering curses and unfold the doors of premature and violent death, to pining famine and full-fed disease, to all that shares the lot of human life, which, poisoned body and soul, scarce drags the chain that lengthens as it goes and clanks behind. Commerce has set the mark of selfishness, the signet of its all-enslaving power, upon a shining ore, and called it gold, before whose image bow the vulgar great, the vainly rich, the miserable proud, the mob of peasants, nobles, priests and kings, and with blind feelings reverence the power that grinds them to the dust of misery. But in the temple of their hireling hearts, gold is a living god, and rules in scorn all earthly things but virtue. Since tyrants, by the sale of human life, heap luxuries to their sensualism and fame to their wide-wasting and insatiate pride, success has sanctioned to a credulous world the ruin, the disgrace, the woe of war. His hosts of blind and unresisting dupes the despot numbers. From his cabinet, the puppets of his scheme, he moves at will, even as the slaves by force or famine driven beneath a vulgar master to perform a task of cold and brutal drudgery, hardened to hope, insensible to fear, scarce living pulleys of a dead machine, mere wheels of work and articles of trade that grace the proud and noisy pomp of wealth. The harmony and happiness of man yields to the wealth of nations. That which lifts his nature to the heaven of his pride is bartered for the poison of his soul. The weight that drags to earth his towering hopes, blighting all prospect but of selfish gain, withering all passion but of slavish fear, extinguishing all free and generous love of enterprise and daring, even the pulse that fancy kindles in the beating heart, to mingle with sensation it destroys, leaves nothing but the sordid lust of self, the grovelling hope of interest and gold, unqualified, unmingled, unredeemed, even by hypocrisy. And statesmen boast of wealth. The wordy eloquence that lives after the ruin of their hearts can gild the bitter poison of a nation's woe, can turn the worship of the servile mob to their corrupt and glaring idol fame. From virtue trampled by its iron tread, although its dazzling pedestal be raised amid the horrors of a limb-strewn field, with desolated dwellings smoking round. The man of ease, who, by his warm fireside, to deeds of charitable intercourse and bare fulfilment of the common laws of decency and prejudice confines the struggling nature of his human heart, is duped by their cold sophistry. He sheds a passing tear, perchance, upon the wreck of earthly peace, when near his dwelling's door the frightful waves are driven, when his son is murdered by the tyrant, or religion drives his wife raving mad. But the poor man, whose life is misery and fear and care, whom the morn wakens but to fruitless toil, who ever hears his famished offspring scream, whom their pale mother's uncomplaining gaze forever meets, and the proud rich man's eye flashing command, and the heart-breaking scene of thousands like him, he little heeds the rhetoric of tyranny. His hate is quenchless as his wrongs. He laughs to scorn the vain and bitter mockery of words, feeling the horror of the tyrant's deeds and unrestrained but by the arm of power that knows and dreads his enmity. The iron rod of penury still compels her wretched slave to bow the knee to wealth, and poison with unprofitable toil a life too void of solace to confirm the very chains that bind him to his doom. Nature, impartial in munificence, has gifted man with all-subduing will. Matter, with all its transitory shapes, lies subjected and plastic at his feet, that, weak from bondage, tremble as they tread. How many a rustic Milton has passed by, stifling the speechless longings of his heart in unremitting drudgery and care. How many a vulgar Cato has compelled his energies, no longer tameless then, to mould a pin or fabricate a nail? How many a Newton, to whose passive ken the mighty spheres of that gem infinity were only sparks of tinsel fixed in heaven to light the midnights of his native town? Yet every heart contains perfection's germ. The wisest of the sages of the earth, that ever from the stores of reason drew science and truth and virtue's dreadless tone, were but a weak and inexperienced boy, proud, sensual, unimpassioned, unimbued with pure desire and universal love, compared to that high being of cloudless brain, untainted passion, elevated will, which death, who even would linger long in awe within his noble presence and beneath his changeless eye-beam, might alone subdue. Him, every slave now dragging through the filth of some corrupted city his sad life, pining with famine, swollen with luxury, blunting the keenness of his spiritual sense with narrow schemings and unworthy cares, or madly rushing through all violent crime to move the deep stagnation of his soul, might imitate and equal. But mean lust has bound its chains so tight around the earth that all within it but the virtuous man is venal. Gold or fame will surely reach the price prefixed by selfishness to all but him of resolute and unchanging will, whom nor the plaudits of a servile crowd, nor the vile joys of tainting luxury can bribe to yield his elevated soul to tyranny or falsehood, though they wield with blood-red hand the sceptre of the world. All things are sold. The very light of heaven is venal. Earth's unsparing gifts of love, the smallest and most despicable things that lurk in the abysses of the deep, all objects of our life, even life itself, and the poor pittance which the law allows of liberty, the fellowship of man, those duties which his heart of human love should urge him to perform instinctively, are bought and sold as in a public mart of undisguising selfishness that sets on each its price, the stamp mark of her reign. Even love is sold. The solace of all woe is turned to deadliest agony. Old age shivers in selfish beauty's loathing arms, and youth's corrupted impulse prepare a life of horror from the blighting bane of commerce, whilst the pestilence that springs from unenjoying sensualism has filled all human life with hydra-headed woes. Falsehood demands but gold to pay the pangs of outraged conscience. For the slavish priest sets no great value on his hireling faith, a passing pomp some servile souls whom cowardice itself might safely chain, or the spare might of avarice could bribe to deck the triumph of their languid zeal, can make him minister to tyranny. More daring crime requires a loftier meed. Without a shudder, the slave soldier lends his arms to murderous deeds, and steels his heart when the dread eloquence of dying men, low mingling on the lonely field of fame, assails that nature whose applause he sells for the gross blessings of a patriot mob, for the vile gratitude of heartless kings, and for a cold world's good word, viler still. There is a nobler glory which survives until our being fades, and, solacing all human care, accompanies its change. Deserts not virtue in the dungeon's gloom, and in the precincts of the palace guides her footsteps through that labyrinth of crimes, imbues her lineaments with dauntlessness, even when, from power's avenging hand, she takes her sweetest, last, and noblest title. Death. The consciousness of good which neither gold nor sordid fame nor hope of heavenly bliss can purchase, but a life of resolute good, unalterable will, quenchless desire of universal happiness, the heart that beats with it in unison, the brain whose ever wakeful wisdom toils to change reason's rich stores for its eternal weal. This commerce of sincerest virtue needs no mediative signs of selfishness, no jealous intercourse of wretched gain, no balancings of prudence, cold and long. In just and equal measure all is weighed. One scale contains the sum of human weal, and one the good man's heart. How vainly seek the selfish for their happiness denied to aught but virtue. Blind and hardened they who hope for peace amid the storms of care, who covet power they know not how to use, and sigh for pleasure they refuse to give. Madly they frustrate still their own designs, and when they hope that quiet to enjoy which virtue pictures bitterness of soul, pining regrets and vain repentances, disease, disgust and lassitude pervade their valueless and miserable lives. But hoary-headed selfishness has felt its death blow and is tottering to the grave. A brighter morn awaits the human day, when every transfer of earth's natural gifts shall be a commerce of good words and works, when poverty and wealth, the thirst of fame, the fear of infamy, disease and woe, war with its million horrors and fierce hell, shall live but in the memory of time, who, like a penitent libertine, shall start, look back, and shudder at his younger years. The notes for Canto V are extensive, and there are more than one of them. So, Canto V, the first note relates to the lines, "Thus do the generations of the earth go to the grave and issue from the womb. One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth for ever. The sun also ariseth, and the sun goeth down, and hasteth to his place where he arose. The wind goeth toward the south, and turneth about unto the north. It whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again according to his circuits. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Unto the place when the rivers come, thither shall they return again." Quote from Ecclesiastes, chapter 1. The second note on Canto V is attached to the lines, "As the leaves which the keen frost wind of the waning year has scattered on the forest soil." And this is from Pope's Homer. "Like leaves on trees the race of man is found, now green in youth, now withering on the ground. Another race the following spring supplies, they fall successive and successive rise. So generations in their course decay, so flourish these when those are passed away." Then we have a further poem. This is the next note on Canto V, and this is attached to the line, "The mob of peasants, nobles, priests and kings." When the wide ocean maddening whirlwinds sweep and heave the billows of the boiling deep, pleased do we from land the reeling bark survey, and rolling mountains of the watery way. Not that we joy on others' woes to see, but to reflect that we ourselves are free. So the dread battle ranged in distant fields ourselves secure a secret pleasure yields. But what more charming than to gain the height of true philosophy? What pure delight from wisdom's citadel to view below deluded mortals as they wandering go in quest of happiness, blindly weak. For fame, for vain nobility they seek. Labour for heapy treasures night and day, and pant for power and magisterial sway. O wretched mortals, souls devoid of light, lost in the shades of intellectual night. That's from Dr. Busby's Lucretius. And the next note on Canto V is attached to the line, "And statesmen boast of wealth. There is no real wealth but the labour of man. Were the mountains of gold and the valleys of silver, the world would not be one grain of corn the richer. No one comfort would be added to the human race. In consequence of our consideration for the precious metals, one man is enabled to heap to himself luxuries at the expense of the necessaries of his neighbour. A system admirably fitted to produce all the varieties of disease and crime which never fail to characterise the two extremes of opulence and penury. A speculator takes pride into himself as the promoter of his country's prosperity, who employs a number of hands in the manufacture of articles avowedly destitute of use, or subservient only to the unhallowed cravings of luxury and ostentation. The nobleman who employs the peasants of his neighbourhood in building his palaces until jam porca aratro jugera regiae molles relinquent, flatters himself that he has gained the title of a patriot by yielding to the impulses of vanity. The show and pomp of courts adduce the same apology for its continuance, and many a fate has been given, many a woman has eclipsed her beauty by her dress to benefit the labouring poor and to encourage trade. Who does not see that this is a remedy which aggravates, whilst it palliates the countless diseases of society? And the poor are set to labour for what? Not the food for which they famish, not the blankets for want of which their babes are frozen by the cold of their miserable hovels, not those comforts of civilization without which civilized man is far more miserable than the meanest savage, oppressed as he is by all its insidious evils within the daily and taunting prospect of its innumerable benefits assiduously exhibited before him. No, for the pride of power, for the miserable isolation of pride, for the false pleasures of the 100th part of society. No greater evidence is afforded of the wide, extended and radical mistakes of civilized man than this fact. Those arts which are essential to his very being are held in the greatest contempt. Employments are lucrative in an inverse ratio to their usefulness. The jeweller, the toyman, the actor gains fame and wealth by the exercise of his useless and ridiculous art, whilst the cultivator of the earth, he without whom society must cease to subsist, struggles through contempt and penury, and perishes by that famine which, but for his unceasing exertions, would annihilate the rest of mankind. I will not insult common sense by insisting on the doctrine of the natural equality of man. The question is not concerning its desirableness, but its practicability. So far as it is practicable, it is desirable. That state of human society which approaches nearer to an equal partition of its benefits and evils should, caeteris paribus, be preferred. But so long as we conceive that a wanton expenditure of human labour, not for the necessities, nor even for the luxuries of the mass of society, but for the egotism and ostentation of a few of its members, is defensible on the grounds of public justice, so long as we neglect to approximate to the redemption of the human race. Labour is required for physical and leisure for moral improvement. From the former of these advantages the rich, and from the latter the poor, by the inevitable conditions of which their respective situations are precluded. States which should combine the advantages of both would be subjected to the evils of neither. He that is deficient in firm health or vigorous intellect is but half a man. Hence it follows that to subject the labouring classes to unnecessary labour is wantonly depriving them of any opportunities of intellectual improvement, and that the rich are heaping up for their own mischief the disease, lassitude, and ennui by which their existence is rendered an intolerable burthen. English reformers exclaim against sinecures, but the true pension list is the rent roll of the landed proprietors. Wealth is a power usurped by the few to compel the many to labour for their benefit. The laws which support this system derive their force from the ignorance and credulity of its victims. They are the result of a conspiracy of the few against the many, who are themselves obliged to purchase this preeminence by the loss of all real comfort. The commodities that substantially contribute to the subsistence of the human species form a very short catalogue. They demand from us but a slender portion of industry. If these only were produced, and sufficiently produced, the species of man would be continued. If the labour necessarily required to produce them were equitably divided amongst the poor, and still more, if it were equitably divided amongst all, each man's share of labour would be light, and his portion of leisure would be ample. There was a time when this leisure would have been of small comparative value. It is to be hoped that the time will come when it will be applied to the most important purposes. Those hours which are not required for the production of the necessaries of life may be devoted to the cultivation of the understanding, the enlarging our stock of knowledge, the refining our taste, and thus opening to us new and more exquisite sources of enjoyment. It was perhaps necessary that a period of monopoly and oppression should subsist before a period of cultivated equality could subsist. Savages perhaps would never have been excited to the discovery of truth and the invention of art, but by the narrow motives which such a period affords. But surely, after the savage state has ceased and men have set out in the glorious career of discovery and invention, monopoly and oppression cannot be necessary to prevent them from returning to a state of barbarism. Godwin's Inquirer, Essay 2. See also Political Justice, Book 8, Chapter 11. It is a calculation of this admirable author that all the conveniences of a civilized life might be produced if society would divide by labour equally among its members, by each individual being employed in labour 2 hours during the day. And another note from Canto V attaches to the lines, or religion drives his wife raving mad. I am acquainted with a lady of considerable accomplishments, and the mother of a numerous family whom the Christian religion has goaded to incurable insanity. A parallel case is, I believe, within the experience of every physician. For some, the approach of death and hell to stay, their parents, friends, and country will betray. Dr. Busby's Lucretius. And another note from Canto V. Even love is sold. Not even the intercourse of the sexes is exempt from the despotism of positive institution. Law pretends even to govern the indisciplinable wanderings of passion, to put fetters on the clearest deductions of reason, and by appeals to the will to subdue the involuntary affections of our nature. Love is inevitably consequent upon the perception of loveliness. Love withers under constraint. Its very essence is liberty. It is compatible neither with obedience, jealousy, nor fear. It is there most pure, perfect, and unlimited, where its votaries live in confidence, equality, and unreserve. How long, then, ought the sexual connection to last? What law ought to specify the extent of the grievances which should limit its duration? A husband and wife ought to continue so long united as they love each other. Any law which should bind them to cohabitation for one moment after the decay of their affections would be a most intolerable tyranny, and most unworthy of toleration. How odious an usurpation of the right to private judgment should that law be considered, which should make the ties of friendship indissoluble in spite of the caprices, the inconstancy, the fallibility and capacity for improvement of the human mind. And by so much would the fetters of love be heavier and more unendurable than those of friendship, as love is more vehement and capricious, more dependent on those delicate peculiarities of imagination, and less capable of reduction to the ostensible merits of the object. The state of society in which we exist is a mixture of feudal savageness and imperfect civilization. The narrow and unenlightened morality of the Christian religion is an aggravation of these evils. It is not even until lately that mankind have admitted that happiness is the sole end of the science of ethics, as of all other sciences, and that the fanatical idea of mortifying the flesh for the love of God has been discarded. I have heard, indeed, an ignorant collegian adduce in favour of Christianity its hostility to every worldly feeling. But if happiness be the object of morality, of all human unions and disunions, if the worthiness of every action is to be estimated by the quantity of pleasurable sensation it is calculated to produce, then the connection of the sexes is so long sacred as it contributes to the comfort of the parties, and is naturally dissolved when its evils are greater than its benefits. There is nothing immoral in this separation. Constancy has nothing virtuous in itself, independently of the pleasure it confers, and partakes of the temporizing spirit of vice in proportion as it endures tamely moral defects of magnitude and the object of its indiscreet choice. Love is free. To promise forever to love the same woman is not less absurd than to promise to believe the same creed. Such a vow, in both cases, excludes us from all inquiry. The language of the votarist is this: "And the woman I now love may be infinitely inferior to many others. The creed I now profess may be a mass of errors and absurdity, but I exclude myself from all further information as to the amiability of the one and the truth of the other, resolving blindly and in spite of conviction to adhere to them." Is this the language of delicacy and reason? Is the love of such a frigid heart of more worth than its belief? The present system of constraint does no more in the majority of instances than make hypocrites or open enemies. persons of delicacy and virtue, unhappily united to one whom they find impossible to love, spend the loveliest season of their life in unproductive efforts to appear otherwise than they are for the sake of the feelings of their partner or the welfare of their mutual offspring. Those of less generosity and refinement openly avow their disappointment and linger out the remnant of that union which only death can dissolve in a state of incurable bickering and hostility. The early education of their children takes its colour from the squabbles of the parents. They are nursed in a systematic school of ill humour, violence, and falsehood. Had they been suffered to part in the moment when indifference rendered their union irksome, they would have been spared many years of misery. They would have connected themselves more suitably, and would have found that happiness in the society of more congenial partners, which is forever denied them by the despotism of marriage. They would have been separately useful and happy members of society, who, whilst united, were miserable, and rendered misanthropical by misery. The conviction that wedlock is indissoluble holds out the strongest of all temptations to the perverse. They indulge without restraint in acrimony, and all the little tyrannies of domestic life, when they know that their victim is without appeal. If this connection were put on a rational basis, each would be assured that habitual ill temper would terminate in separation, and would check this vicious and dangerous propensity. Prostitution is the legitimate offspring of marriage and its accompanying errors. Women, for no crime other than having followed the dictates of natural appetite, are driven with fury from the comforts and sympathies of society. It is less venial than murder, and the punishment which is inflicted on her who destroys her child to escape reproach is lighter than the life of agony and disease to which the prostitute is irrevocably doomed. Has a woman obeyed the impulse of unerring nature, society declares war against her, pitiless and eternal war. She must be the tame slave, she must make no reprisals. Theirs is the right of persecution, hers the duty of endurance. She lives a life of infamy. The loud and bitter laugh of scorn scares her from all return. She dies a long and lingering disease, yet she is in fault. She is the criminal. She, the froward and untamable child, and society, forsooth, the pure and virtuous matron who casts her as an abortion from her undefiled bosom. Society avenges herself on the criminals of her own creation. She is employed in anathematizing the vice today, which yesterday she was the most zealous to teach. Thus is formed 1/10 part of the population of London. Meanwhile the evil is twofold. Young men, excluded by the fanatical idea of chastity from the society of modest and accomplished women, associate with these vicious and miserable beings, destroying thereby all those exquisite and delicate sensibilities whose existence cold-hearted worldlings have denied, annihilating all genuine passion and debasing that to a selfish feeling which is the excess of generosity and devotedness. Their body and mind alike crumble into a hideous wreck of humanity. Idiocy and disease become perpetuated in their miserable offspring, and distant generations suffer for the bigoted morality of their forefathers. Chastity is a monkish and evangelical superstition, a greater foe to natural temperance even than unintellectual sensuality. It strikes at the root of all domestic happiness, and consigns more than half of the human race to misery, that some few may monopolize according to law. A system could not well have been devised more studiously hostile to human happiness than marriage. I conceive that from the abolition of marriage, the fit and natural arrangement of sexual connection would result. I by no means assert that the intercourse will be promiscuous. On the contrary, it appears from the relation of a parent to a child that this union is generally of long duration, and marked above all others with generosity and self-devotion. But this is a subject which it is perhaps premature to discuss. That which will result from the abolition of marriage will be natural and right, because choice and change will be exempted from restraint. In fact, religion and morality as they now stand compose a practical code of misery and servitude. The genius of human happiness must tear every leaf from the accursed book of God ere man can read the inscription on his heart. How would morality, dressed up in stiff stays and finery, start from her own disgusting image, should she look in the mirror of nature?